Rain crashed violently against the towering glass walls of the mansion, each drop hammering like an accusation. Inside the dimly lit study, Clara Bennett stood trembling, her fingers clutching a manila folder so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. The folder contained everything: documents, reports, photographs, evidence that could destroy the man standing across from her. Ethan Caldwell's voice cut through the storm's fury, low and controlled, yet somehow more dangerous than any shout. "Say it. Tell me why you're really here." Clara's lips quivered. She had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind, but now, facing him, the words caught in her throat like shards of glass. "Because of what you did," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the thunder. "To my family." The silence that followed was suffocating. Ethan stepped closer, and in the dim light, Clara could see the raw pain flickering across his face. A pain she hadn't expected, hadn't prepared for. "So every smile," he said slowly, deliberately, "every moment we shared, every conversation, was a lie?" Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Not every moment," she breathed. The folder slipped from her fingers, scattering papers across the marble floor like fallen leaves. And in that instant, both of their carefully constructed walls came crashing down. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. 5 years ago, Ethan Caldwell stopped believing. Not in business, he was brilliant at that. Not in success, his empire stood as proof of his relentless drive. He stopped believing in the things that made life worth living: love, trust, connection, hope. He stopped believing that people could be genuine, that relationships could last, that anything in this world existed beyond transactions and calculated risks. The mansion he called home sat perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean, a monument to wealth and isolation. From the outside, it was breathtaking, all glass and steel and modern architectural genius. But inside, it was a mausoleum. Every room pristine, every surface untouched, every space echoing with the hollow sound of one man's footsteps and nothing more. It hadn't always been this way. There was a time when Ethan Caldwell laughed freely, when his eyes held warmth instead of ice, when he believed in something more than profit margins and quarterly reports. That time died on a foggy autumn evening 5 years ago, when Isabella Hayes, the woman he loved more than life itself, boarded a ferry that would never reach its destination. The official report called it an accident, mechanical failure, unfortunate timing, tragic, but no one to blame. But Ethan knew better. He had spent 5 years digging, investigating, questioning. The ferry company had been cutting corners, rushing inspections, ignoring safety protocols, all to meet the aggressive timeline of a corporate merger. A merger that his company, Caldwell Enterprises, had pushed for, had insisted upon, had made profitable beyond measure. Isabella died because someone valued speed over safety, and Ethan had signed the papers that made it happen. He never forgave himself. More importantly, he never forgave the world. If business could kill the person he loved most, then business was all he would engage in. No more vulnerability. No more opening his heart. No more believing that anything or anyone could be trusted beyond a contract's black and white terms. The staff at his mansion learned quickly. Ethan didn't want conversation. He didn't want pleasantries. He wanted efficiency, silence, and invisibility. Employees came and went, none lasting long in the oppressive atmosphere of isolation and cold professionalism. Until Clara Bennett walked through the door. She arrived on a gray Tuesday morning in March, her resume modest, her references adequate but unremarkable. The agency had sent her as a replacement for the previous housekeeper, who had quit after only 3 weeks. Clara was in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that seemed to hold depths Ethan couldn't quite read. "Mr. Caldwell," she said simply when they met, offering a firm handshake. "I understand you value privacy and professionalism. I can provide both." Ethan nodded curtly. "The West Wing needs daily attention. My study is off limits unless I specifically request cleaning. I'm rarely home before 8 in the evening. You won't see me often." "Understood," Clara replied. What Ethan didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Clara Bennett hadn't stumbled into his employment by chance. She had orchestrated it with careful precision, spending months positioning herself, waiting for the right opening, preparing for this exact moment. Clara came from a small coastal community 300 miles north, a town called Harmony Bay that most maps didn't bother to include. It had been a fishing village once, sustained by the ocean and the tight-knit families who had lived there for generations. Clara's father, Thomas Bennett, had been a fisherman like his father before him, pulling his livelihood from the sea with weathered hands and an honest heart. But 10 years ago, everything changed. Caldwell Enterprises had purchased the rights to offshore drilling near Harmony Bay, promising jobs, prosperity, and minimal environmental impact. The promises were lies. Within 2 years, the fishing grounds were contaminated. Marine life disappeared. The water that had sustained the community for a century became toxic. The lawsuits went nowhere. Caldwell Enterprises had lawyers, resources, and connections that a small coastal town couldn't match. The settlement they eventually offered was a pittance, enough to close the case, but not enough to rebuild lives. Thomas Bennett lost everything. His boat, his livelihood, his purpose. He took a job at a processing plant 3 towns over, but the work broke his spirit. He died of a heart attack when Clara was 23, and she was certain that heartbreak had killed him more surely than any medical condition. Clara had spent the years since planning. Not revenge. She wasn't interested in simple destruction. She wanted truth. She wanted acknowledgement. She wanted the man responsible to face what his decisions had cost people like her father. She wanted Ethan Caldwell to understand that every business decision had a human face. So she researched. She learned everything about Caldwell Enterprises, about Ethan's routines, about the revolving door of staff at his mansion. She took courses in hospitality management, built a credible work history, and waited for her chance. When it came, she took it. The first 2 weeks at the mansion, Clara barely saw Ethan. He left early, returned late, and communicated through terse notes left on the kitchen counter. The orchids in the entryway are dead. Replace them. The study blinds should remain closed. I'll be in San Francisco until Friday. Clara followed his instructions precisely, but she also began making subtle changes. She opened windows in rooms that had been sealed shut for years, letting fresh ocean air circulate through the stale spaces. She replaced the sterile, lifeless artificial flowers with simple arrangements of wildflowers from the cliffside. In the kitchen, she began preparing fresh meals, not the processed, pre-packaged food the previous staff had stocked, but actual cooking that filled the house with the scent of garlic, herbs, and home. And sometimes, when she worked, she hummed. Soft, haunting melodies her grandmother had taught her, songs from Harmony Bay that spoke of the sea and loss and endurance. Ethan noticed. He didn't comment at first, but Clara would catch him pausing at doorways, his head tilted slightly, as if trying to place a melody. She'd see him standing by an open window, breathing deeply, looking almost confused by the fresh air. 3 weeks into her employment, Ethan spoke to her for the first time beyond basic instructions. It was a Thursday evening. A rare power outage had plunged the mansion into darkness, and Clara was lighting candles in the main living room when Ethan appeared. He stood frozen in the doorway, his face pale, his breathing rapid and shallow. Clara recognized panic when she saw it. "Mr. Caldwell," she said gently, "the power will be back soon. Come, sit down." "I don't." Ethan's voice was strained. "The dark. I don't do well with." "I know," Clara said, though she didn't, not really. She simply responded to the human need in front of her. "Sit, please." Ethan moved like a man underwater, lowering himself into a chair across from where Clara sat. The candlelight flickered between them, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "The fairy," Ethan said suddenly, the words escaping before he could stop them. It was night. Foggy. Dark. When it went down, people said the darkness was the worst part. Not being able to see. Not knowing which way was up. Clara's breath caught. She knew about Isabella Hayes. Everyone who researched Ethan Caldwell knew about Isabella Hayes. But hearing the raw grief in his voice, seeing the way his hands trembled, this was different from reading old news articles. "You don't have to sit in the dark alone," Clara said softly. Ethan looked at her then, really looked at her, for the first time. "Why would you care?" "Because no one should sit in the dark alone," Clara replied. The power came back 20 minutes later, flooding the room with artificial light. Ethan stood abruptly, his professional mask sliding back into place. "Thank you, Ms. Bennett. That will be all for tonight." But something had shifted, and both of them knew it. In the days that followed, Ethan found himself doing something he hadn't done in years, coming home earlier. Not by much, just 30 minutes here, an hour there. But enough to find himself in the kitchen when Clara was preparing dinner, in the living room when she was arranging flowers, in the hallway when she was humming those strange, beautiful songs. One evening, he asked, "What is that song? The one you always hum?" Clara looked up from the vase she was arranging. "It's called The Ocean's Promise. My grandmother taught it to me. It's from my hometown." "Where are you from?" "A small place. You wouldn't know it." Clara turned back to the flowers, her heart racing. This was the moment she'd been preparing for. Harmony Bay. If Ethan recognized the name, he didn't show it. "I've heard of it, I think." "Coastal town." "It was," Clara said carefully. "Before the drilling." Ethan's expression didn't change, but Clara saw his shoulders stiffen slightly. "I see." He left the room without another word. Clara stood alone with the flowers, wondering if she'd pushed too fast, revealed too much. But that night, for the first time, she found a note on the kitchen counter that wasn't an instruction. It simply said, "Thank you for dinner." It reminded me that food can actually taste like something. If you're still watching up to now, type, "I'm still here," in the comment section. The transformation happened gradually, like ice melting in spring, so slow you barely noticed until suddenly there was water where solid ground had been. Ethan began eating dinner at home instead of working late. At first, he ate alone in his study, but Clara would find the plates empty, scraped clean, and occasionally there'd be another note. The risotto was excellent. "Is there more of that bread?" Then one evening, he appeared in the kitchen doorway while Clara was cooking. "Do you mind if I eat here?" he asked. "The dining room feels excessive for one person." Clara gestured to the kitchen table. "Please." They ate in silence that first night, but it was a comfortable silence. The second night, Ethan asked about the recipe. The third night, Clara asked about his day. By the end of the week, they were having actual conversations. "Why did you get into real estate development?" Clara asked one evening, keeping her voice casual. Ethan set down his fork, considering. "I thought I could build things that mattered. Create spaces where people could live, work, thrive. Architecture as a force for good." He laughed bitterly. "Naive, wasn't it?" "Was it?" Clara challenged. "Or did you just stop believing in the possibility?" Ethan looked at her sharply. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Maybe not," Clara acknowledged. "But I know what I see. A man who's built a prison and locked himself inside it." Ethan should have been angry, should have fired her on the spot for such insolence. Instead, he found himself laughing. Actually laughing, for the first time in 5 years. A prison. That's exactly what it is. "So open the door," Clara said simply. "It's not that easy." "Who said it would be easy? Most things worth doing aren't." Over the following weeks, Clara watched as Ethan slowly came back to life. He started taking morning walks along the cliff. He began reading again, not just business reports, but actual books, novels and poetry that Clara would leave strategically placed. He even smiled occasionally, small expressions that transformed his entire face. And Clara found herself in dangerous territory. She had come to expose him, to make him face the consequences of his actions. But the man she was getting to know wasn't the callous corporate villain she'd imagined. He was broken, grieving, isolated. He was a man who had made terrible mistakes, but had punished himself more severely than any court ever could. She began to see the internal struggle playing out in his business decisions. Late one night, she found him in his study, surrounded by papers, his head in his hands. "What's wrong?" she asked from the doorway. Ethan looked up, his eyes red. "There's a deal. Lucrative. Very lucrative. But the environmental reports are concerning. My lawyers say we can push through, that the regulations are technically on our side, but..." He stopped, looking at Clara. "I don't know what to do anymore." "What does your gut tell you?" "That some things are more important than profit." "Then you have your answer," Clara said. Ethan canceled the deal the next morning. It cost Caldwell Enterprises millions. His board was furious. But when he came home that evening, Clara saw something in his face she'd never seen before: peace. But Clara's own guilt was growing. Every evening they spent together, every conversation, every moment of genuine connection, it all felt like a betrayal of her original purpose. She had the evidence. She had documented everything about the Harmony Bay drilling disaster, traced the decisions back to Caldwell Enterprises, proven the negligence that had destroyed her community. She had come to make Ethan face the truth, but now she was falling for him. The realization hit her one evening as they sat on the terrace, watching the sunset. Ethan was telling her about Isabella, actually opening up about the woman he'd loved and lost. "She made me believe I could be better," Ethan said quietly. "That business didn't have to be ruthless to be successful. That you could build an empire and keep your soul." He paused. "I failed her. I became exactly what she feared I would become." "You're not that person anymore," Clara said, and she meant it. Ethan turned to her, and in his eyes, Clara saw something that made her heart stop. "Because of you," he said. "You walked into this house and refused to let me hide. You opened windows I'd sealed shut. You brought life back to these dead spaces." He reached for her hand. "You brought me back to life." Clara should have pulled away, should have maintained distance. Instead, she let him take her hand, let herself lean into the warmth of his touch. "Who are you, Clara Bennett?" Ethan asked softly. "Really?" And Clara almost told him. The truth was right there, balanced on her tongue. But fear stopped her. Fear that the truth would destroy this fragile thing growing between them. Fear that she'd lose him just as she was finding him. "I'm someone who cares about you," she said instead. "That's the truth that matters." They kissed that night, on the terrace overlooking the ocean, with the stars bearing witness to a connection that felt both inevitable and impossible. For 3 weeks, Clara allowed herself to live in a beautiful lie. She and Ethan became lovers, partners, confidants. He shared his deepest fears, his greatest regrets. She held him when nightmares about the ferry accident woke him at 3 in the morning. He made her laugh, challenged her thinking, made her feel valued in ways she'd never experienced. But the folder remained hidden in her room, the evidence waiting like a loaded gun. The truth came out on a stormy Friday evening, the kind of night where the ocean roared and the wind threatened to tear the world apart. Ethan had been away on a business trip. He returned early, wanting to surprise Clara. Instead, he found her in his study, the room that was supposed to be off-limits, carefully photographing documents with her phone. "Clara." She spun around, her face draining of color. "Ethan, I didn't. You weren't supposed to be back until tomorrow." Ethan's eyes moved from Clara to the documents spread across his desk. Recognition dawned slowly, painfully. "Those are files on Harmony Bay? The drilling project. Why are you?" He stopped, putting pieces together. "Your hometown. You said your hometown was Harmony Bay." Clara couldn't speak, couldn't move. Ethan walked to his desk, his movements careful, controlled. He saw the folder then, the one Clara had brought with her, filled with newspaper clippings, official reports, photographs of a destroyed coastline and broken families. He picked up a photograph. A middle-aged man standing beside a fishing boat, smiling despite the weariness in his eyes. "Who is this?" "My father," Clara whispered. "Thomas Bennett. He lost everything when your company contaminated the fishing grounds. He died 5 years ago." The silence stretched between them, thick with betrayal and pain. "So this," Ethan gestured between them. "All of this was what? Research? Getting close to me so you could gather evidence?" At first, Clara admitted, tears streaming down her face. "I came here to make you face what you'd done, to force you to acknowledge the lives your business destroyed. And then I met you. The real you. Not the CEO, not the corporation, but the man behind it all. And her voice broke. "I fell in love with you." Ethan laughed, but it was a hollow, broken sound. "Love? You're telling me about love while standing in my study, photographing confidential documents." "I was trying to understand," Clara said desperately. "I needed to know if you knew. If you understood what happened in Harmony Bay." "I knew," Ethan said quietly. "Of course I knew. Do you think I don't review every project? Every disaster? Every lawsuit?" He turned to face her fully, and the pain in his eyes was unbearable. "Harmony Bay is one of 27 communities damaged by Caldwell Enterprises projects. 27, Clara. I have a file for each one. I read them sometimes, late at night, making sure I never forget the cost of my success." Clara staggered backward, as if struck. "Then why didn't you do anything?" "I did do something," Ethan said bitterly. "I shut down. I stopped caring. I built walls so high that nothing could touch me. Because if I let myself feel the weight of what I'd done, if I truly acknowledged every life I'd destroyed, I'd have to face the fact that I'm exactly what you thought I was. A monster who values profit over people. You're not a monster, Clara said. You're a man who made terrible mistakes. And what's the difference? Ethan demanded. My mistakes killed people, Clara. Your father. Isabella. How many others? What's the difference between intentional evil and negligent destruction? Intent, Clara said firmly. Accountability. Change. You're not the same man who signed those deals. I've watched you transform. I've seen you choose differently. Because of you, Ethan said. Because I was trying to impress you, trying to be worthy of you. And all along, you were here under false pretenses. I fell in love with you, Clara repeated. That wasn't false. These feelings aren't false. How would I know? Ethan asked. How could I possibly know what's real when everything started with a lie? The storm outside intensified, rain hammering the windows like bullets. Lightning split the sky, illuminating their faces in stark flashes of white light. Clara moved toward him. I'm telling you the truth now. I came here angry, seeking justice. But I stayed because I found something I never expected, a man worth saving. Worth fighting for. Worth loving. Stop, Ethan said, holding up his hand. Just stop. I can't do this again. I can't trust someone only to have them destroy me. I'm not trying to destroy you, Clara said. Then what are you trying to do? Ethan demanded. What happens now? Do you take this evidence and expose me? Ruin Caldwell Enterprises? Is that what you want? I want you to take responsibility, Clara said. Not because I'm forcing you, but because it's the right thing to do. I want you to acknowledge what happened in Harmony Bay and the other communities. To make it right. And if I don't, Clara picked up the folder, holding it against her chest like a shield. Then I'll do what I came here to do. I'll make sure the world knows what Caldwell Enterprises has done. They stood facing each other, the full truth finally exposed between them, raw and terrible and unavoidable. Ethan's voice, when he spoke again, was barely above a whisper. 5 years. I felt nothing for 5 years. I was numb, dead inside, going through the motions. And then you came, and you made me feel again. Joy, hope, love. His voice cracked. And now I feel everything. And it hurts more than the numbness ever did. Clara stepped closer, reaching for him. Ethan. No, he said, pulling back. You need to leave. Take your evidence. Do whatever you think you need to do. But I can't. I can't look at you right now and not wonder what was real and what was manipulation. Everything was real, Clara said desperately. From the moment I sat with you in the darkness, from the first dinner, the first real conversation, all of it was real. I don't believe you, Ethan said. And that's the worst part. I want to believe you. God, I want to believe you so badly. But I can't. Not anymore. Clara stood there, tears streaming down her face, holding a folder that represented justice for her father but would destroy the man she loved. The choice she'd always known she'd have to make was finally here, sharp and impossible. I'm sorry, she whispered. For lying. For hurting you. For all of it. But I'm not sorry for loving you. That's the one true thing in all of this. She turned and walked out of the study, out of the mansion, into the storm. And she didn't look back. Ethan stood alone in his study, surrounded by the evidence of his failures, feeling the walls he'd built come crashing down. But this time, they didn't protect him. They buried him. Clara returned to her small apartment in the city, the folder sitting on her kitchen table like an accusation. She opened it, looking at the photographs of her father, the reports documenting the environmental destruction, the proof that could bring Caldwell Enterprises to its knees. She thought about justice, about accountability, about her father, who had died broken and defeated. And she thought about Ethan, about the man who had learned to live again, to care again, to choose differently. Some battles, she realized, weren't about winning. They were about what victory would cost her soul. 3 days later, Clara made her decision. She didn't expose Ethan. She didn't go to the press or file lawsuits or seek public vindication. Instead, she walked away. She quit her job at the mansion, packed her small apartment, and prepared to return to Harmony Bay. But she left something behind. An envelope, delivered to Ethan's office, containing the complete folder of evidence and a single note. It read, I came for justice. But I realized that true justice isn't about punishment. It's about transformation. You've already started that journey. Whether you continue is your choice. The evidence is yours now. What you do with it will define who you truly are. I believe in the man you're becoming. I hope someday you will too. Ethan received the envelope on a Monday morning. He sat in his office for 3 hours, reading every document, looking at every photograph, forcing himself to truly see, perhaps for the first time, the human cost of his business decisions. He saw Thomas Bennett's face and thought about Clara's eyes. He saw the destroyed coastline and remembered the ocean view from his terrace. He saw the numbers, settlements too small, compensation inadequate, justice denied, and felt sick. That evening, he didn't go home to the mansion. He drove north for 5 hours until he reached Harmony Bay. The town was smaller than he'd imagined, a collection of weathered buildings clinging to a rocky coast. The harbor, once bustling with fishing boats, now held only a handful of vessels. The water, even from a distance, looked wrong, slightly discolored, lifeless. Ethan walked through the town, seeing the boarded-up shops, the for-sale signs, the evidence of a community slowly dying. An elderly woman sitting on a bench watched him with suspicious eyes. "You lost, son?" she asked. "Yes," Ethan said honestly. "I think I've been lost for a very long time." He returned to his car and drove back to the city. But something fundamental had shifted. Seeing the destruction in person, walking through the graveyard of a community his company had killed, it made everything real in a way reports and lawsuits never had. 2 weeks later, Ethan called a press conference. His board of directors tried to stop him. His lawyers threatened to quit. But Ethan had made up his mind. Standing before cameras and reporters, Ethan Caldwell did something unprecedented in the corporate world. He told the truth. 5 years ago, he began, his voice steady but his hands trembling. "The woman I loved died in a ferry accident caused by negligence and the pressure to meet corporate deadlines. I have spent those 5 years hiding from my own grief and my own complicity in a world that values profit over people." He paused, looking directly into the cameras. "Today, I'm here to acknowledge that Caldwell Enterprises has been responsible for environmental damage, community destruction, and human suffering in 27 locations across this country. Harmony Bay is just one example. We cut corners. We ignored warnings. We settled lawsuits for amounts that might satisfy legal obligations, but do nothing to restore what we've taken." The reporters erupted with questions, but Ethan held up his hand. "I'm not here for questions. I'm here to announce comprehensive reparations for every community affected by our negligence. Full environmental restoration, fair compensation for lost livelihoods, and my resignation as CEO of Caldwell Enterprises, effective immediately." The financial cost was staggering. The personal cost was everything. But as Ethan walked away from the podium, away from the company he'd built, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: freedom. He returned to the mansion one last time. The staff had been told of his resignation. The cleaning service would be discontinued. The house would be sold. But as Ethan walked through the empty rooms, he noticed something. The windows were still open, letting in fresh air. The wildflowers Clara had planted were blooming in simple vases. The kitchen still smelled faintly of herbs and home-cooked meals. Clara had changed more than just him. She'd changed the space itself, transforming a mausoleum into a home. Ethan stood on the terrace, looking out at the ocean, when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned, and there she was. Clara stood in the doorway, her hair loose around her shoulders, her eyes uncertain but hopeful. "I saw the press conference," she said softly. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Ethan replied. "You were right. About everything. About me building a prison. About the importance of accountability. About—" He stopped, emotion catching in his throat. "About the possibility of becoming someone better." "I'm sorry," Clara said. "For lying. For the way I came into your life." "I'm sorry too," Ethan said. "For what my company did to your father. To your community. I can't bring him back or undo the damage. But I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to make it right." They stood facing each other, the ocean breeze carrying the scent of salt and possibility. "Where do we go from here?" Clara asked. Ethan smiled. A real smile, genuine and unguarded. "I don't know. For the first time in my life, I don't have a plan. No strategy. No calculated next move." "That sounds terrifying," Clara said. "It sounds like living," Ethan replied. Clara crossed the terrace and took his hand. "You didn't just change your life. You gave it back." "We gave it back to each other," Ethan said. The sun was setting over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The mansion, soon to be sold, stood behind them, no longer a prison but a testament to transformation. to the possibility that people could change, that mistakes could be acknowledged, that love could bloom even in the most unlikely soil. Clara and Ethan stood together, watching the light fade and knowing that darkness no longer held the same terror it once had. Because they had learned, together, that you don't have to sit in the dark alone. Sometimes the people who come into our lives carrying the deepest wounds are the same ones who teach us how to heal. Sometimes revenge transforms into redemption. Sometimes the truth doesn't destroy us, it sets us free. And sometimes, just sometimes, a billionaire who stopped believing in everything can learn to believe again, all because one woman refused to let him hide in the shadows. The end isn't always neat. Clara and Ethan's future held challenges: rebuilding trust, managing the fallout from his confession, working together to restore Harmony Bay and the other damaged communities. But they faced it together, two broken people who had found wholeness in each other's honesty. Love isn't always simple. Justice isn't always straightforward. But choosing to be better, to do better, to open locked doors and sealed windows, that's always the right choice. As Clara and Ethan left the mansion for the last time, hand in hand, they carried with them a simple truth. We are defined not by our worst mistakes, but by what we do after we make them. And in the choice to acknowledge harm, to seek restoration, to love despite betrayal, and trust despite fear, in that choice lies the possibility of redemption for us all. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. Real transformation, whether in our own lives or in others, happens when we have the courage to face uncomfortable truths and choose change over comfort. Ethan could have stayed hidden in his mansion, and Clara could have chosen revenge over understanding. But both of them found something more powerful: the strength to grow. If this story moved you, if it made you think about second chances, accountability, or the complexity of human nature, please take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. What resonated with you most? Have you ever had to choose between justice and mercy? We'd love to hear your reflections. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore the depths of human experience, the power of redemption, and the unexpected ways that love can transform even the most broken among us. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Until next time, remember, it's never too late to choose differently.